Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lunch with EFI. It's another fabulous Wednesday with a great group of people here today. We've got Jay Green, Jason Bedrick, and Ian Kingsbury, who are all going to talk to us at various points throughout lunch here. And we're going to start off with Jay. So, Jay, take it away.
Sure. So, put up last week on the Center for Accountability in Medicine website a debunking of a study that was posted on NBER, claiming that teams of female obstetricians have advantages in preventing maternal complications. Okay, and honestly, I don't think that study is that important, but what's important about it is the pattern. So there's a pattern of econometric analyses to scientifically prove the benefits of essentially discriminatory policies. And because we have a natural aversion to discrimination, we don't like it. We don't like the idea of treating people based on their identity, racial or sexual, and we prefer to treat people as individuals and judge their merits individually. But to overcome that aversion, we have science to get us used to the idea that, well, you may not like it, but unless you want people to die, you need to do this, right? A little Remy shout out. So this study, it's all very, very complicated. It's very convoluted. And what it does is it allows people who want to believe it to wave it around and say, science says you got to discriminate. Sorry, that's just the way it is. And so then it takes people like me to pour through it. And it's almost always in the appendix where you find the flaw. But it's actually quite hard to find. And it's also hard to explain it to others. So I will attempt to do that now quickly, but honestly, it's not easy. But I will tell you that I strongly believe that this is not a valid result. Okay, so it's based on Florida birth records using the same data set that was used in the Greenwood study that was previously debunked, claiming that Black doctors saved the lives of Black babies in Florida. This is the same data set. In this data set, when babies are born, there's a spot for attending physician on the form, and there's a spot for operating physician on the form. Okay, in 77% of cases, it's the same name, but in 23% of cases, there are two different names. And what this study does is it exploits the fact that there are two names in 23% of the cases to look at the sex of those names, of those doctors, to see if both of those names are female, are there better outcomes for the mother in the delivery than if both of those names are male or if they're mixed teams. Okay. Now, first you have to wonder, and in fact, most importantly, you have to wonder, why is it that there are two different names 23% of the time? It just says on the form, attending and operating. Instantly in the article, they change those to lead and assisting, which are not the words in the form, but those are the words used in the study. And in a footnote, they will tell you that those are not the words, they're different words. They've given them those words because they want you to feel like there's a team of people working together to deliver a baby, okay? And that if both of them working together are female, that they communicate and collaborate better, and that's what reduces complications. But actually, that's not, that is true only rarely, even more rarely than 23%. A lot of the time, there's a handoff that occurs because of a shift change. The reason why there are two names is you start delivery with one person, but their shift is done, they got to go home, and then they hand you off to someone else, and that's the person who delivers the baby, and that's why there are two names listed. Okay. Now here's where the ball is hidden. Female obstetricians work significantly fewer hours than male obstetricians. And there are a lot of good reasons for this, work-life balance, lots of things. It's not a criticism of female obstetricians in any way. It's simply a fact that they work shorter hours. And because they work shorter hours, they have more handoffs, right? Makes sense? And because there are more handoffs...
Jay, just quickly, why do they work shorter hours?
Because well, it is a thing in our society that women have a lot of responsibilities at home and are more assertive in protecting their time to make sure they can attend to those responsibilities. And so they don't just stay longer, they leave, they go home, okay? And that's not a criticism, it's not a dereliction of their duties as an obstetrician, it's just a reality of their lives, okay? So they leave and they hand off to another doctor who also quite often is another female obstetrician. And that's how you get the all-female teams. And they acknowledge that this occurs. But they say still collaboration and communication is really important because in the handoff you have to say important details to the other person. And that's the female advantage, is that they talk to each other better, okay? So, but the problem is that if you have more handoffs, then routine deliveries, which on average take less time, are more likely to have two physicians listed if the initial physician is female, because they hand off, okay? So that means that a higher share of routine deliveries with female obstetricians make it into the two-name category, while if the physician were male, they'd be more likely to finish the entire delivery because they work longer hours. Okay, so that routine delivery doesn't show up in the data set with two names if the doctor is male, but does show up in the data set if the doctor is female. And so what that means is that the number of routine deliveries is overrepresented for female doctors because they have more handoffs. And they're only analyzing the instances where there are two names, okay? And I actually, carefully go through their numbers, and you could see that that it appears very likely that there's an overrepresentation of these handoff deliveries in females. Not a ton, but enough so that the benefit they observe, which is a difference in maternal complication of 0.18%, okay? But with 500,000 observations, 0.18% of a difference in the rate of maternal complication is statistically significant, okay? That's entirely explainable by a higher rate of routine deliveries being handed off. Now, I don't want to get into the details of medicine here. The real point of this is the problem of DEI research. To find that was hard. To tell you this story and convince you of it is hard. And so we have this uphill battle all the time of trying to talk people out of something that they may have political reasons to embrace. Mm-hmm. Now, what we have going in our favor is a natural aversion to discrimination. So people will listen to us if we put in the effort because they don't want to discriminate if they don't have to. And so maybe we can convince them that science doesn't compel them to discriminate.
Jay, are you confident that aversion exists within young people? I mean, I would be concerned that they're being trained up with value systems that actually don't naturally repudiate that.
It's an excellent question. I don't know the answer for certain. I guess we can worry that the kind of fundamental liberalism, by which I mean liberal, like small L liberal idea that the individual is the fundamental unit of our political system, is not as common today as it once was. But I still think it's pretty common. And it may be less common among elites who've gone through more rigorous training in how they should think of themselves as not individuals, but as part of groups. And again, to be clear, we are all parts of groups and we all parts of communities, and our identities do matter. I don't want to dismiss any of that. But from the perspective of a political system, do we want a political system that treats people as groups, or a political system that treats people as individuals? I think the notion that you would be treated with reward or punishment because of your group identity is still an affront to most people. They don't like the idea that the government would punish them, take something away from them, not for anything they did, but because of something of the group that they are attributed to. That feels like injustice to most people, even today, including young people. Of the benefits they like more, right? Like getting benefits because of your group feels better, but getting punished because of your group still is an affront. Yeah.
So this is and this is perfect because our next topic actually is along the same lines, where the data is just like you need to do something with it in order to make it, because in your example, Jay, there is a right way to do that, right? With 500,000, with an N of 500,000, you can use the data in a way that's relevant and makes sense. You can do that. You can weight it, or
2 million. It's 2 million cases. The 500,000 is the ones with two names.
Okay. So even better. There's a right way to do that. In Jason's example here that we're going to talk about next, which is our main dish, there is this similar strand of problems with using specific sets of data.
And the need for smart people to discover where the flaw is and tell you about it.
Right.
And also just the way that people portray the results, even if that's not what they found. So the Auditor General in Arizona has finally released its report. Now you should know, and I wish Matt Ladner were here. He's on a plane right now because Matt's been covering this for a long time. The Auditor General's report was delayed considerably because their original findings were so outrageous, so off the mark, that the Department of Education in Arizona sent them a very detailed memo detailing all the flaws in their report and their findings, including, for example, saying that you guys are not doing risk-based auditing. And they said, what are you talking about? We are doing risk-based auditing, and we have provided you with copious evidence of our risk-based auditing. And their response initially was, well, you didn't do it with us. Like, you didn't do it in conjunction with the Auditor General. And the response there was, well, yeah, but we don't have to. We can do these things internally. So anyway, the report is very critical of the department, but people are blowing things out of proportion. So for example, we have Craig Harris, who works for Channel 12 News. He is probably one of the worst journalists I've ever seen. It is incredible how many times, just on this story alone, he has not just gotten facts wrong, but he always gets them wrong in the same direction. So here he is claiming that the Auditor General report found a 34% misspending rate in the what he called the Empowerment Scholarship Program, the ESA in Arizona. Okay, he's previously claimed that 20% of the funds were misspent, that 20% of families misspent some funds, that 20% of transactions were misspending. One of those statements is correct. Two of those statements are way off base. It's true that 20% of parents had some amount of misspending, but the overall rate of misspending was only 2%, right? So you can imagine parents that are buying, they're paying for tuition, they're paying for tutoring, and then they also buy a backpack, okay? And the department says, okay, that backpack or water bottle or lunchbox was not approved, okay?
And misspending doesn't mean that it happened, or that it means that they thought it was permitted and then they were told, oh no, it's not permitted.
Correct.
Oh, well,
Correct.
Right? There's no real downside, right?
Fraudulent spending was 0.3%. According to the department, the misspending was 2%. But again, most of that was innocent. So again, people
it's like the rate of the times that I mistype in my password,
right,
relative to the number of times that someone attempts to hack into
Right, which are two
I mean,
totally different things. So here,
Yeah.
Craig is saying that that this report found a 34% rate of misspending. Now, the funny thing is, Craig is
Hold
doing
on,
the
but Jason,
same
just
thing.
I have to say,
Craig is doing the same thing that he does every time, which is wherever you have an analysis that is not a random analysis, that is not generalizable, Craig treats it as generalizable if it looks bad for the program. And anytime that you actually have a real random audit, like what the department did and found 2% misspending, 0.3% actual fraud, in those cases, he kicks up a bunch of smoke and he doesn't want to believe the results, right? And that's exactly what he's doing here, because the report never says that it's 34% misspending. As a matter of fact, you will see down below, it says, we selected audit samples to provide sufficient evidence to support our findings, conclusions, and recommendations. Unless otherwise noted, the results of our testing using these samples were not intended to be projected to the general population. And if you actually read the report itself, what you find is that what they're doing is they are not trying to assess how much fraud is in the program or how much misspending is in the program. They're taking a look specifically at different types of transactions to test how well the department is picking up on fraud. So for example, when you have a risk-based audit and you have a whole bunch of items that are flagged for further audits, how well is the department actually then auditing those items that were flagged, right? And so what they find is, looking at those, you had 3 transactions where there was overpayment. This is a tiny sample of 63. This is not a generalizable sample.
right.
So for Craig to treat it, especially when the Auditor General itself says, don't treat this as a generalizable statement. Do not project this to the whole population. We're just looking, this is not a random audit. We're selecting certain things in order to detect how well the department is doing it. And even there, again, only 2 unallowable expenses amounting to less than 1% of the dollars in the sample. Only 3 that were overpaid, amounting to 4% in the sample. You're talking less than 5% in the sample. And again, these are items that were flagged by the risk-based auditing. So
They were hand selected.
Yes, they hand selected it. And yes, there were a few things that were missing documentation, but this is not to be conflated with misspending, as Craig Harris does, right? So let's say they buy supplementary materials and they have to hand in their curriculum with it. Okay, they purchase things that are very clearly allowed, but they didn't include the documentation. So what's going to happen? The department is going to reach out and say, hey, you got to provide this document. They provide the document. So to conflate all of that with, or let's say they're going to a school, but they didn't actually show that the school is accredited, even though it is, right? So there are a number of instances like that where it's very clearly not misspending, but we have people. This is Representative Oscar de los Santos. Stunning record fraud in the ESA vouchers. More than 1 in 3 transactions are waste, fraud, or abuse. And who is he citing? He's citing Garrett Archer. Now, Garrett Archer, he's a local journalist at ABC News, not the same outlet as Craig Harris. I would say Garrett is much more fair, but Garrett actually, in this little image, he cropped out that little warning at the bottom, don't project this to the entire population. Now, I confronted him about that. And I said, look, did you do that intentionally? He said, no, basically.
So you're saying it was an error, not fraud.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Exactly. He said, no, but who would project to the whole population based on just 63 transactions? Basically applying, only an idiot would do that. I'm like, yeah, well, you've got a bunch of Democratic politicians and Craig Harris at 12 News doing exactly that, but of course they are a bunch of idiots. And actually, idiot is being charitable. The less charitable explanation is that they are intelligent enough to know exactly what they're doing, and they are lying to the public because they believe that their constituents or their viewers are stupid enough to believe.
Well, there's an in-between, which is that they apply their intelligent, skeptical mind when things don't go in the direction that they expect and desire, and they don't apply any scrutiny when things are in the other direction.
Right, confirmation bias. Look, this is something
you could apply actually that you could apply that same principle to bad DEI research, both
Exactly.
in
It's the same
its
exact thing.
production and how it's received, right?
And it's a similar kind of problem, which is what's the set of things that we're looking at? Is it a representative set? So is the set of instances where there are 2 doctors listed, is that representative of all? Is that just like a random draw of all?
Right.
Yeah, right, but it's not.
So, look, confirmation bias is a part of the human condition. The point, though, is that
Not for
research
me.
is supposed to have, right now, except for Jay, research is supposed to have peer review, checks and balances, right? You're supposed to have a system that is meant to weed out the confirmation bias. But unfortunately, the system we have now actually far too often only confirms those biases. And it's the same thing with journalism. I mean, this is why you have the New York Times this week running the rape dog story in Israel, which is absolutely absurd.
When you call,
and Craig Harris is doing the exact same thing. He applies his skepticism only to claims that don't confirm his priors, and anything, no matter how ludicrous, that seems to confirm his priors, he's going to run with without even understanding the basic facts. So he's going to push a narrative. It's frankly shameful for 12 News that they have him on the staff. And they should know. I speak to a lot of state legislators. Republicans have zero confidence in anything that is coming out of 12 News right now, especially from Craig Harris, but it taints the entire brand. And so, to lose the respect of, at minimum, half the population, you've got to wonder, what am I doing here as a journalist if nobody actually trusts me?
So this brings up one of my favorite Michael Crichton creations.
Oh, yeah.
The Gelman amnesia.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. And it's like, people will just totally uncritically look at this story and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe stunning. And this is my favorite word that gets repeated by Oscar de los Santos and, that came out of Craig Harris, the stunning 34% fraud rate, right? They'll look at that totally uncritically and then turn the page and find an article on something that they know something about. Well, that story is totally wrong. I can't believe this idiot reporter would publish this. They have no idea what they're talking about. And it's like, it's the best. And I do it, we all do it from time to time. We're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just read this about this person. It's probably all true. I had no idea that this person was such a degenerate. And then you find out that this story was planted by someone who hates the person.
Solution to this Gelman, what is it called again?
Gell-man amnesia effect.
Okay. So the solution to it is what Jason's describing, which is institutions that provide reliable examination, vetting of the information before so that when you go to them, whether you're familiar with the topic or not familiar with the topic, you can consistently believe them. And but there's been a breakdown in that kind of institution.
There are criticisms
from journalism to academia, think tanks, right? I mean, don't get me started. Like I'm anti-think tank. I know I work for them.
We won't go there. Jay's
he's also anti-academia, and he worked there for a good time.
Well, I don't think. Yeah, I've never worked for something that I don't think should go away.
This is the Groucho Marx, right?
This is perhaps why I haven't risen up in these organizations quite like I should.
That's funny.
Well, look, I mean, when you have junk research and when you have people torturing the data to confess to anything because we're feeding into confirmation bias, you're going to eventually develop policies that are not going to work, which leads us to Ian's story about some LGBTQ policies.
There were any number of ways in which you could have done that transition, but that was well done. As
Right, bravo.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah. On the note of not credible organizations and bad research, so the Trevor Project, which is commonly cited in schools or even partnering with public schools, is an organization that's taken seriously by many on the left and even some in the center. It was started a number of years ago after the murder of a young gay man in, was it Wyoming or Colorado? The facts of which are disputed, apparently. The official narrative is that it was a hate crime. There's some skepticism and belief that perhaps it was a drug deal gone bad. But anyway, young man tragically loses his life. The Trevor Project was started as a gay civil rights organization. And what we see with the Trevor Project, and they're certainly not alone in this regard, is what happens to an organization after a dog catches car moment, and the mission is complete. So, not to say that things are perfect for gay people by any means, but at least on a legal level, I think after Obergefell, which is 2015, guaranteeing the right to gay marriage, the battle, for all intents and purposes, was over. But the Trevor Project and other organizations, which take in, probably tens of millions of dollars a year in donations, they've got a good thing going, and they don't want to go away. And so they found a new issue, which was, transgenderism, especially among children, which was not really a thing that anyone was discussing before that time. It wasn't really a phenomenon within the youth population. Certainly, I don't remember anyone in my high school who identified as transgender, and that wasn't that long ago. But anyway, that becomes their new civil rights issue, is this issue of basically childhood transgenderism. And most of what the Trevor Project does at this point is centered around this particular issue. And so they just came out with updated survey results, which are getting national attention, as they always do. And, on the note of bullshitty research, it's funny to look at the way that they frame their questions, and then understand the results in those contexts. And so on their report, they're asking whether, quote unquote, anti-LGBTQ legislation is responsible for young gay or trans-identified people's mental health condition. And they frame it as
your own condition, or your opinion about how it's affecting other people's condition.
So the question is, we don't know exactly, because among other critiques, as far as I can tell, they don't show us their exact survey questions. But based on
the sample only trans kids, or is
gender nonconforming or
LGBTQ.
Yeah, LGBTQ, right? I guess LGBTQ2IA plus, to be precise.
No two spirits. No two spirits in the sample. I don't know.
I'm sorry.
I said we don't have two spirits in the sample. I guess that's only for Canadians.
In one of those letters or numbers, they might fit in there. I'm not exactly sure.
Fully human only.
It's hard to keep up at this point, isn't it?
No dogs.
That's next year's iteration. We're getting there. In fact, I think we're approaching the point soon where we can just, we can identify which letters we're leaving out rather than which ones are in, because it'll be shorter. But just wait for that. We'll be there soon. But anyway, again, they don't tell us their exact questions. But if you're framing a question as essentially, what is the effect of quote unquote anti-LGBTQ legislation on your mental health? It's very obviously a leading question. I mean, it's like asking, what is your opinion of the sweet, delicious taste of Dr. Brown's soda, right? Like, it's not how you conduct serious research. And so, the result is baked in. It's a foregone conclusion. And so when they say that, 9 in 10 young LGBTQ people are experiencing distress because of this legislation, well, of course, because they asked the question that way. And when you look what this legislation actually entails, whether it's restricting access to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for young people, or in Florida, what's pejoratively referred to as the Don't Say Gay bill, but is really about not allowing classroom teachers to introduce kids to gender identity and gender ideology.
Before third grade.
Right. This is common sense stuff, and we even see politically when we get into the meat of the legislation that the people who defend this stuff have a hard time defending it on its merits. I mean, they have to sort of hold up this boogeyman and call it "Don't Say Gay."
Do you remember when Cory Booker accused Betsy DeVos, of being anti-gay, and said he was voting against her because if she were confirmed as the Secretary of Education, that gay kids nationwide were going to kill themselves. Where I would be actually impressed if any children knew who the Secretary of Education was. I have to correct one thing from earlier. It was Matthew Shepard, not Trevor. It was Matthew Shepard, who was a student at the University of Wyoming, who was either who was killed, either murdered, or drug deal gone wrong, whatever the situation was. Trevor apparently was not a real person. It was a short film called Trevor about a gay person who commits suicide or attempts suicide.
Okay.
So that's where the Trevor Project apparently comes from. But otherwise, point, very well taken. And
and thank you for fact checking, even though it agreed with your eyes. That's a responsible thing to do.
The system is working.
It's working.
It's working. I remember, I think that's the Matthew Shepard story, but I double checked. But go ahead, Jay. You're gonna say something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm embarrassed that we we conflated a fictional story with an actual story, but it does get confusing. It's hard.
Well, I also misattributed a quote a couple of weeks ago that was.
Well, that Harry Potter quote, yes.
The Harry Potter quote. I confused Snape and Dumbledore, and I don't remember in which direction. So there are some factual errors on this show sometimes, but importantly, we correct them, and that's the difference.
Well, I'll play the role.
If you point them out to us, we will honestly contend with them.
That's right.
Yeah,
I'll play the role of TV's Andy Levy and be our live ombudsman.
There you go. But anyway, all of this is to say with the story that I presented, Trevor Project is an organization that doesn't deserve to be taken seriously. If you see it partnering with your school or you see the resources in your school, it should be a point of objection. I mean, this is a radical activist organization.
We do have a generic problem here, which again is a manifestation of an institutional failure. That not just that if you kind of run out of your issue, you have to have another issue to keep going as an organization, but also whatever issue you do have perverse incentives to hype up too much, even real things, right? So like I'll take the example of anti-Semitism is real and it's a real problem, but many of the organizations involved in that advocacy space do hype it up, and it's actually counterproductive. It makes people numb to the real things by distorting. It undermines the credibility of the real accusations of anti-Semitism. And so in aggregate, it doesn't help the advocacy cause to overstate or abuse data. But there's an individual and there's a collective action problem here where the individual organization or individual author has a desire for attention or resources, and so they will inflate it, sometimes, and that we don't have the institutional checks on that to keep everyone honest.
In the most extreme examples, perhaps wiring money to hate groups while monitoring hate groups.
Right.
For example.
Right. Well, and the theory their defense is we needed to have moles in these organizations so we can monitor their activities and more effectively combat them. But the counter theory is, well, you were actually inflating the activity, not just rhetorically, but you were in the world inflating it so that you could then raise money to combat it.
Right.
If you pay people to march and chant the Jews will not replace us, and then you say anti-Semitism is really terrible and you have to give me money so I can fight them.
I believe that's called a racket.
Yeah.
Well, but But help me figure out what's not the racket. I mean, like, we don't want to fall into nihilism. We have to figure out some way of sorting out the grifter from the not grifter. And the problem is the incentives aren't aligned well to keep out the grifter and reward the sober person who does identify problems, but in a correct and rigorous way.
Well, and the status quo, to your point, Jay, the status quo is rewarding pushing to the boundaries on both ends of that. And so, and that's just to your point earlier, and I think we all agree on that. We don't want to go too far in the other direction because we end up like the ADL in that example. But, you know, if we can get it right and be thoughtful and smart and fair, even though, you know, but that requires us taking a position too, I think, to, you know, like we have and like we do on this show and in the organization EFI that sponsors this show. I think there's room there to work. I will say it can be discouraging when you see, back to Jason's example, a reporter, an employee of another news organization, and then legislators piling on with the same message, just torturing data in one direction. And they have, you know, what we call the bully pulpit. There's some democratization of that with social media, and thank heaven for that. But it can still be discouraging from time to time because you feel like you're not getting your voice out in a counterbalance to just bad work.
Although there is a solution here that gives me some hope, which is that programs like school choice in Arizona have a large number of beneficiaries. There are families that are participating in it. And they have a lot of direct experience and indirect experience from their friends who are also participating in these programs. And so when programs reach critical mass, the kind of direct experience and physical reality of the world will win over the rhetorical, distorted world of the online people. Okay. And so, and also the distorted, unreal world of national advocacy groups. So I take comfort that school choice is reaching the point where school choice advocacy organizations, at least at the national level, mostly don't matter. Like they could do bad things, and they might, but local self-organizing beneficiaries are the safeguard against that. And it's kind of working in Arizona mostly. I know that it's nerve-wracking.
Well, we will find out. We talked a lot about this last week while you were gone, and actually cited you on this idea of, you know, what political sustainability entails. And of course, we did talk about how there is at least one so-called school choice group, American Federation for Children, that is doing very bad things in Arizona, and there's more to come on that. You know, as with last week, I have another series of videos that people have provided me, which probably I'll talk about next week. We're already over time, so I'll save that for later. But we will find out, is 100,000 students considered critical mass or not?
It's 1 in 8, but we don't. But you know, there are 2 ballot measures that are going on that may go on the ballot in November, and we'll see. You know, we'll see if 1 in 8 is enough.
1 in 8. I don't know the exact proportion of Americans receiving Social Security, but it's probably pretty close to 1 in 8, and that's plenty enough to protect Social Security over time. Similarly, Medicare, you know, is probably close to 1 in 8. And don't get me wrong, there are problems in Medicare. There is misspending. There is fraud. But no one says, let's kill these programs or regulate them to death. Instead, they just try to figure out some sensible balance and keep perspective about them and see the good things. And the reason why they see the good things about these programs is that you have an eighth of the population as beneficiaries. And so I'm hopeful that that's actually enough for school choice, that we've achieved escape velocity politically. and then it fulfills my dream of rendering the nonprofits useless, and then they can go away and everything will be fine.
Yeah, I think on Medicare and Medicaid, SEIU and the AFL-CIO and every other union has found a way to benefit from those programs.
Yeah,
So
but
maybe we just need to invite the NEA and the AFT. Hey, why don't you come participate in the ESA program in Arizona?
Well, Social Security doesn't survive because AARP exists. AARP is grifting off of Social Security in the same way that
Right.
SEIU is grifting off of Medicare, right?
Right.
They're selling insurance and discounts at hotels or whatever it is that AARP does, but they're not necessary for protecting Social Security. It's all the beneficiaries who will beat Dan Rostenkowski's car with their fists if you try to mess with their benefits.
Right. All right. Well, we are 10 minutes over, but it was a great discussion. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you guys for coming and for a great conversation. I hope you have a great Wednesday.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.